Welcome to our deep dive into McCormick and Company. You want to really understand their business model, and I think we've got just the thing here,
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
whole stack of their recent 10K and 10Q reports.
Yeah, I think you'll be surprised. Uh,
I'm excited to dig into these and see what we can find.
I think you'll be fascinated to learn how a company that's known for little spice bottles has become a global powerhouse of flavor.
Yeah, that's what I'm really curious about. When I think McCormick, I think spices in the grocery store, but obviously there's a lot more to it than that. So where do we even begin?
Well, at the heart of every business model is how they make money. McCormick operates through two main segments. The consumer segment, which is what you're most familiar with, and then the flavor solutions segment.
So flavor solutions, is that like bulk spices for restaurants?
More than just bulk spices. Think custom blends and sauces flavorings developed specifically for restaurants, food manufacturers, even those pre-made meals that you grab for a quick dinner. It's all about helping these businesses create consistent and craveable flavors.
Okay, so they've got like the home cook and then these big food companies covered. But I'm guessing those familiar red-capped spice jars are still driving a lot of revenue.
They are, but here's a surprising fact. Even though both segments contribute to McCormick's net sales, the consumer segment is significantly more profitable. In 2023, for example, it accounted for 57% of net sales, but a whopping 73% of operating income.
Wait, hold on. 73% of operating income from 57% of sales.
Yeah.
That's a huge difference. Why is the consumer segment so much more profitable?
Brand recognition plays a big role. Think about it. You're standing in the spice aisle, and there are dozens of brands staring back at you. Do you reach for the unfamiliar label, or do you go with the familiar red cap? Maybe the brand your grandma always used.
I'll admit I'm a creature of habit in the spice aisle.
Exactly. And that familiarity and that trust allows McCormick to command a premium price in the consumer segment. People are willing to pay a little extra for the flavor and quality that they've come to associate with those iconic brands.
Okay, so brand loyalty is a powerful thing. Um, but making all of those spices and sauces and flavorings must come with its own set of costs. What are some of McCormick's biggest expenses?
Well, let's start with what's probably the most obvious: the cost of the ingredients themselves. We're talking spices, herbs, dairy products, you name it. And those costs can fluctuate, wildly driven by things like weather, crop yields, and even global events.
I remember reading something about McCormick struggling with pepper prices recently. Didn't the conflict between Russia and Ukraine impact things as well?
Absolutely. Pepper prices have been on a roller coaster lately. And events like the conflict in Ukraine just add to the uncertainty. It really highlights how vulnerable global supply chains can be. And of course, those disruptions have a ripple effect on McCormick's costs.
So how do they deal with that kind of volatility?
Yeah.
I mean, you can't just stop making spices if pepper prices skyrocket.
You're right. They need strategies to mitigate these risks. McCormick has a few tricks up its sleeve. They try to make strategic purchases like buying in bulk when prices are low, or they might lock in contracts for future delivery at a fixed price. They also have this continuous cost improvement program, CCI, which is all about finding efficiencies and reducing waste throughout their operations.
I love a good acronym. So CCI. So they're constantly looking for ways to do things better and cheaper.
Hmm.
But I'm guessing ingredients are just one piece of the cost puzzle.
There's also the cost of getting those products onto store shelves and into restaurants. We're talking marketing, distribution, and all the behind-the-scenes operations of a global company. Those selling general and administrative expenses, as they're called, add up quickly. And then there are occasional special charges, things like restructuring costs or even pulling out of specific markets like they did with Russia recently. Those decisions, while sometimes necessary, can come with a hefty price tag.
Right. I can imagine exiting a market's a costly and complex process. And let's not forget about interest rates. I bet their expenses related to debt have gone up in the past couple of years, with rates rising the way they have.
You're spot on. Their financial reports actually highlight rising interest expenses as a factor impacting their profitability in both 2022 and 2023.
Okay, so we've talked a lot about costs, but I'm curious about the customer side of things. What are people really getting when they choose McCormick? It can't just be about the flavor, right? You're right, it goes beyond just taste. It's about a certain level of trust, a guarantee of quality and consistency that comes with that familiar red cap. McCormick's value proposition is multifaceted, especially when you consider they're serving both everyday consumers and large-scale food businesses.
So it's like two different value propositions in one thing. Exactly. For consumers, it's about convenience, quality ingredients, a wide variety of choices, and of course, that brand trust that we were just talking about. Think about brands like McCormick, French's, Frank's Red Hot. They've been around forever. They evoke a sense of nostalgia, reliability, flavorful meals. And for the home cook, McCormick also provides inspiration, encouraging them to experiment with different flavors and cuisines.
It's true, I do find myself grabbing spices I've never tried before just to try out a new recipe.
Yeah.
What about on the flavor solutions side? What do those big food companies value most?
For food service and food manufacturers, consistency is key. They need to know that the flavors they're building into their products will be the same every single time, no matter the batch size. McCormick's expertise in sourcing, blending, and quality control gives them that assurance. And beyond consistency, it's about innovation. McCormick works closely with these customers to develop custom flavor profiles that meet specific needs, help them streamline their operations, and ultimately create products that consumers will love.
So it's like having a secret weapon in the kitchen, whether you're whipping up dinner at home or developing a new line of frozen meals. But this brings up a question that's been on my mind. Just how reliant is McCormick on a few big customers? Could that be a risk for them?
That's a great question, and it's something they actually acknowledge in their financial reports. Customer concentration can be a risk.
Hmm.
For example, Walmart represents about 12% of their overall sales, and in the flavor solutions segment, PepsiCo accounts for around 13%. Losing even one of those big clients could have a significant impact.
Okay, so they're aware of that risk. But it also underscores the importance of brand loyalty, right? If people are demanding McCormick at the grocery store, that gives them leverage with these big retailers.
Exactly. And they're not sitting still. They're constantly working to diversify their customer base and build relationships across a wide range of channels.
Now, this might seem obvious, but with all the food companies out there, how does McCormick stand out? What truly makes them different?
Well, their global reach is a huge advantage. We're not talking about a regional player here. They're a global force and flavor with a presence in over 170 countries. And they've strategically built a diverse brand portfolio catering to different tastes, cultures, and needs across those various markets.
So it's about being everywhere and having something for everyone. What else sets them apart?
They also have a strong focus on vertical integration, essentially controlling more of their own supply chain. This is especially important for spices, where they source and process many of their key raw materials directly.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
It gives them more control over quality costs and even ethical sourcing practices. But I'm curious, with so many established products, how do they stay ahead of the curve? The food world is constantly changing with new trends popping up all the time.
Innovation is a key part of their DNA. They have a dedicated research and development facility in Maryland where food scientists and chefs are constantly experimenting with new flavors, ingredients, and product formats. They're always looking for the next big thing, the next culinary trend that will capture the imagination of home cooks and food businesses alike.
It sounds like they're running a global flavor laboratory.
Mhm.
But with all this complexity, the sourcing, the manufacturing, the distribution, how does McCormick manage all of these moving parts on a daily basis? What are the critical activities that keep this global flavor machine running smoothly?
Well, it all starts with sourcing and procurement, building strong relationships with suppliers, managing the volatility of those raw material prices that we talked about, and ensuring they're sourcing ethically and sustainably. That's absolutely foundational.
Okay, so getting the right ingredients at the right price in the right way is step one.
Mm.
What happens next?
Then it's on to manufacturing and production. McCormick has a global network of manufacturing facilities, each one focused on efficiency, quality control, and safety. They're constantly investing in automation and technology to improve those processes.
It's like a well-oiled, spice-infused machine.
Hmm.
What about getting those flavors out into the world?
Marketing and sales are crucial, of course. It's about building brand awareness, fostering that loyalty. We talked about managing relationships with key customers and constantly adapting to changing consumer preferences.
Right, because what's hot in the culinary world today might be old news tomorrow.
Mm.
They need to have their finger on the pulse. What about the actual logistics of getting products onto shelves?
Distribution and logistics are a huge part of the operation. We're talking about a global supply chain, navigating potential disruptions and leveraging technology for real-time tracking to ensure that the right products reach the right places at the right time.
So they're basically running a global spice ballet, making
Mhm.
sure all the pieces are in sync.
And finally, we can't forget about research and development. That's the engine of their innovation, allowing them to develop those new flavor profiles and product formats that keep consumers excited and coming back for more. They even collaborate with customers on product development, ensuring they're meeting the evolving needs of both home cooks and the biggest names in the food industry.
So they're not just mixing spices, they're orchestrating a global flavor symphony. We covered a lot of ground here, but before we move on, I want to leave you with a thought-provoking question. We're seeing a growing demands for healthier and more sustainable food options. How do you think McCormick will adapt its sourcing, manufacturing, and product development strategies to meet these changing expectations? Keep that in mind as we continue our exploration.
That's a really important question. And it's something we see McCormick actively addressing in their reports. They're very aware of the increasing scrutiny companies are facing regarding their environmental and social and governance practices, what's often called ESG.
ESG, another acronym for the win, but it's more than just letters, right? Consumers are demanding action, not just words. How is McCormick translating that ESG awareness into tangible changes? Are they actually shifting their sourcing practices, for example?
It seems so. They talk about forging long-term supplier relationships, which hints at a move towards more sustainable partnerships. They're also putting a lot of emphasis on managing the volatility of raw material prices, which, as we discussed, can be heavily influenced by climate change and its impact on agriculture.
So they're thinking long term and acknowledging that climate change is a factor. What about their manufacturing processes? Are they taking steps to become more eco-friendly?
They do mention investing in automation and technology, which could lead to more efficient and less wasteful production. And their emphasis on quality control aligns with that consumer demand for transparency and traceability. People want to know where their food comes from and how it's made.
It's like they're recognizing that sustainability isn't just good for the planet, it's good for business too. Speaking of business, let's circle back to those volatile raw material costs for a moment. How does McCormick manage its inventory in the face of all that uncertainty? It's got to be a delicate balancing act.
Absolutely. They talk about utilizing strategic purchasing strategies. This could involve things like buying in bulk when prices are favorable or securing contracts for future delivery to lock in prices. And remember that continuous cost improvement program, CCI, that plays a role here too, helping them find efficiencies and minimize waste throughout the supply chain.
So they're not just reacting to price swings, they're being proactive and planning ahead. But I'm curious, all those carefully laid plans must have been thrown for a loop during the pandemic. Supply chains were disrupted globally. How did McCormick navigate that chaos?
Their 10K report actually offers some insights into that. They acknowledge that disruptions to their supply of raw materials, manufacturing processes, or even distribution channels due to events like pandemics could have a serious impact on their business. Remember, they rely heavily on third-party suppliers for ingredients, packaging, even transportation.
So managing a whole network of relationships during a very chaotic time, what specific steps did they take? Did they just cross their fingers and hope for the best?
Not quite. They highlight the importance of close collaboration with their suppliers to mitigate disruptions. They also talk about diversifying their sourcing options, so they're not overly reliant on any single supplier. And they had to adapt to shifts in consumer demand as panic buying and changes in eating habits influenced what was flying off the shelves.
It sounds like agility and flexibility were key during that time. But pandemics aren't the only curveballs businesses face these days. Cybersecurity is a huge concern. Does McCormick address that in their reports?
They do. They acknowledge the critical importance of their IT systems and the potential for cyber attacks to disrupt their operations, compromise sensitive data, and damage their reputation. It's definitely not something they're taking lightly.
So they're aware of the risks, but awareness isn't enough. What are they actually doing to protect themselves?
They discuss maintaining a robust information security program, which includes things like regularly updating their technology, implementing strict security policies and procedures, conducting thorough risk assessments, and even designing their business processes with cyber risks in mind. They also mention relying on third-party vendors for certain IT services, presumably those with specialized expertise in cybersecurity.
So a multi-layered approach to cybersecurity, which makes sense in today's digital world. But technology is always evolving, and so are the threats. How do they ensure they're staying ahead of the bad guys?
They emphasize the importance of continuous monitoring and adaptation. They know that cyber threats are constantly evolving and becoming more sophisticated. They also invest in employee training and awareness programs, which is critical because, let's face it, human error is often a weak link in any security system.
It's like they're saying, we're not just building a fortress, we're training our people to be vigilant guards.
Hmm.
Okay, so they're protecting their digital assets. But let's shift gears for a moment and talk about their financial strategy. They're a publicly traded company, which means they have to keep investors happy. How have they been using their cash flow? Are they reinvesting in the business, paying dividends, or maybe looking at acquisitions?
Well, they're known for their consistent dividend payments. In fact, they increased the dividend in both 2022 and 2023. That's a strong signal to investors that they're confident in their ability to generate cash flow and return value to shareholders.
So keeping those dividend checks coming is a priority. But what about growth? Are they investing in their own operations or looking for opportunities to expand through acquisitions?
They mentioned using cash flow for capital projects, which could include investments in those manufacturing facilities and technology upgrades we talked about earlier. And they also highlight acquisitions as a potential use of cash, suggesting they're open to strategic growth opportunities if the right fit comes along.
Speaking of acquisitions, they've made a few notable ones in recent years. Cholula Hot Sauce and Fona International come to mind. How do those acquisitions fit into their overall strategy? Are they just buying up brands, or is there a bigger plan at play?
Those acquisitions definitely align with their goal of expanding their flavor portfolio and reaching new markets. Cholula, for example, gives them a stronger presence in the hot sauce category, which has been exploding in popularity. And Fona International is a flavor solutions provider, which strengthens their position in that higher margin segment we talked about earlier.
So they're being strategic, not just impulsive shoppers, but acquisitions can be risky.
Yeah.
How do they ensure they're making smart choices and not just overpaying for a trendy brand?
They emphasize the importance of successful integration, which means seamlessly combining the acquired company's operations culture and products into McCormick's existing structure. That's often where deals fall apart. They also likely conduct very thorough due diligence before any acquisition, carefully assessing the financial health market position and potential risks of the target company.
It's like they're saying, we're not just buying a brand, we're buying a whole team, a whole set of capabilities, and we need to make sure it's a good fit. But acquisitions aren't the only way to grow. What about research and development? How much are they investing in innovation to create their own next big thing?
Innovation is absolutely core to McCormick's strategy. They have that dedicated R&D facility, and their reports highlight their commitment to developing new products and flavors. They're not just sitting back and letting trends pass them by, they're actively shaping the future of flavor. And importantly, they mention collaborating with customers on product development, which helps them stay closely attuned to the needs of both home cooks and those large-scale food businesses.
So they're not just coming up with ideas in a lab. They're working directly with their customers to create solutions that meet specific needs and preferences. But innovation requires talent. How does McCormick attract and retain the best and brightest in the food industry? It's a competitive market out there.
Their reports actually emphasize the importance of their employees, referring to them as human capital, which might sound a bit dry, but it underscores how much they value their people. They highlight their efforts to attract, retain, and develop top talent, and they talk about fostering a diverse and inclusive workplace.
So they're recognizing that their people are a key ingredient in their success, not just a cost on a spreadsheet.
Oh, right.
What specific programs do they have in place to support their employees and create that positive work environment?
They mention a range of human resource programs, including training and development opportunities, performance-based incentives, and a focus on employee well-being. They also highlight their commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion, recognizing that a diverse workforce brings a wider range of perspectives, ideas, and experiences to the table.
It's good to see a company prioritizing its employees and creating a culture where everyone feels valued and respected. But the business world is constantly changing. What are some of the challenges McCormick faces as it looks to the future? What are those potential storm clouds on the horizon?
They acknowledge several potential headwinds, including increasing competition, evolving consumer preferences, and the ongoing impact of climate change. These are challenges that are affecting businesses across many industries. They also mention the potential for regulatory changes and the need to adapt to new technologies, which are constantly disrupting the status quo.
So they're not resting on their laurels. They know they have to keep evolving to stay ahead of the curve. What are some specific examples of how they might adapt to these challenges and turn potential threats into opportunities?
Well, we've already seen evidence of their adaptability in their responses to recent events. They navigated those supply chain disruptions during the pandemic. They're taking steps to address sustainability concerns, and they're investing in cybersecurity to protect their digital assets. They're also expanding into new markets and product categories through those strategic acquisitions.
It's clear they're not afraid to embrace change and make bold moves when necessary.
Yeah.
But I'm curious, what about their financial structure? How much debt do they have? Could that limit their ability to invest and grow in the future?
Their financial reports provide a detailed breakdown of their debt levels and the financial covenants they're subject to. They have a mix of short-term and long-term debt, and they're obligated to maintain specific financial ratios to keep their lenders happy.
So it's a delicate balancing act. They need to fuel their growth ambitions while also staying within those financial boundaries. But it's not just about staying afloat, right? What are their long-term goals? Where do they see themselves in the next 5 to 10 years?
While their reports don't explicitly lay out a grand vision for the future, we can get a sense of their ambitions from their actions and their messaging. They repeatedly emphasize their commitment to growth, both organically by expanding their existing businesses and through strategic acquisitions that bring in new capabilities and market opportunities.
So they're playing the long game, aiming to solidify their position as a true global leader in the flavor industry.
Exactly. And importantly, their focus isn't solely on financial performance. They're also addressing those broader concerns around sustainability, diversity, and employee well being. They seem to understand that a company's long term success depends not just on profits, but on its positive impact on the world.
It's an exciting time for McCormick and for the food industry as a whole. Consumer tastes are evolving, technology is transforming how we eat, and companies are being held to higher standards when it comes to their social and environmental impact. Now, as we delve deeper into the financial intricacies of McCormick's business model in our next segment, I encourage you to consider this. How will McCormick balance the demands of profitability with the increasing pressure to operate in a sustainable and socially responsible manner? Their future success may very well depend on their ability to strike that delicate balance. That's the question, isn't it? Can they keep growing and be profitable while also doing good? I'm really curious to see how they navigate that challenge. But before we get too far ahead of ourselves, I think we need to take a closer look at the foundation of their financial health, their balance sheet. What stands out to you when you look at McCormick's assets and liabilities?
One thing that jumps out at me is their significant amount of goodwill. This is an intangible asset. Basically, the premium they paid for acquisitions like Cholula and F&A above and beyond the fair market value of those companies' physical assets.
So goodwill represents the value of things you can't really touch, like brand recognition, customer relationships, and that secret sauce that makes a company successful. But isn't it kind of risky to have so much tied up in goodwill? What happens if those acquired brands don't live up to expectations?
That's the catch with goodwill. It's based on a lot of assumptions about future performance. McCormick is required to assess their goodwill for impairment every year, which means checking to see if the value of those acquired assets has actually declined.
So it's like checking the spice rack to see if anything has gone stale.
That's a great analogy. And if they find that an acquired brand isn't performing as well as expected, they might have to take a write down, which would impact their profitability.
Makes sense. It's important to keep things fresh both in the spice rack and on the balance sheet.
Yeah.
What other interesting items do you see on the balance sheet?
They also have a substantial amount of other intangible assets, including trademarks, patents, customer relationships. These are all crucial to their success, but again, they're not physical things you can easily value.
Intangibles are so fascinating. They're like the secret ingredients that give a company its competitive edge. But let's flip the balance sheet over and talk about their liabilities. What are their major financial obligations?
Their biggest liability is their long-term debt, which includes bonds they've issued and loans they've taken out to finance their operations and those strategic acquisitions we talked about.
Debt can be a useful tool for growth, but it's not free money.
Hmm.
Those interest payments can really add up, especially with interest rates rising the way they have been. How is their debt level impacting their profitability?
We've seen their interest expense increase in recent years, which puts pressure on their profit margins. It's a balancing act, using debt strategically to fuel growth while also managing those interest costs carefully.
So they can't just go on a spice buying spree without considering the financial consequences.
Yeah.
What other liabilities should we be aware of?
They also have significant lease obligations, primarily for their manufacturing facilities and office spaces. These leases are long-term commitments, meaning they have to make those regular payments regardless of how the business is doing.
It's amazing how all these pieces fit together, from the spices in the jars to the leases on their factories. But let's zoom out for a moment and consider McCormick's overall financial health. How would you assess their profitability and their prospects for future growth?
Overall, they've consistently generated solid profits, and their track record of increasing dividends suggests they're confident in their ability to keep earning money. They're operating in a growing market with global demand for flavor showing no signs of slowing down.
So they have a lot going for them, a strong foundation to build on. But we've also talked about the challenges they face, things like increasing competition, changing consumer preferences, and the need to become a more sustainable business. How might these factors impact their performance down the road?
Those are definitely headwinds they'll need to navigate carefully. Increasing competition could put pressure on their pricing and market share. Shifting consumer preferences might require them to adapt their product offerings or come up with entirely new innovations to stay relevant. And if they don't address sustainability concerns effectively, they could face higher costs, supply chain disruptions, or even damage to their reputation.
It's a complex landscape full of both opportunities and potential pitfalls. But McCormick has a long history of adapting to change and finding ways to innovate. They built a global brand, a loyal customer base, and a resilient business model that has weathered many storms.
Indeed. It will be fascinating to watch how they continue to evolve, leverage their strengths, and navigate these challenges in the years to come. This deep dive has really given me a new appreciation for the intricacies of their business.
Me too. I started this thinking about little spice jars, and now I see a global flavor powerhouse with a complex story to tell. I hope you feel the same way. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into McCormick and Company.